It's Adrienne Lawrence with more of the conversation, and we are going to continue our conversation about guns. This time, I'm joined by Abené Clayton. She's a lead reporter on Guardian Guns and Lies in America, the series. Thank you so much for joining us, Abené.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so first off, what is this series, Guns and Lies?
Yeah, so the series started in 2019, and at the time it was started by my colleague Lois Beckett in the West Coast office for The Guardian. And it was really about kind of charting what was happening in cities like Oakland, where gun violence was hitting historic lows. And I came on as a reporter from Richmond to kind of tell Richmond, California specifically, to tell those stories that go unseen. So often when we talk about gun violence, there's kind of the immediate shooting, the police report comes out, maybe we hear about a vigil, but then there's not much. And there are families, thousands, hundreds of thousands of families who have faced a lot of trauma, and those things are left out of popular news narratives. Often we hear more about mass shootings and things of that nature, but that's really not what constitutes the majority of gun violence in the US. So at the Guns and Lies in America project, we try to tell those untold stories and give readers a full picture of what gun violence looks like in the state.
All right, and so full picture, as you mentioned, is something that people are hoping to get always because you want the truth. But I also know that there are a lot of anxieties right now over crime and violence playing this central role when it comes to the midterms. And those are coming up pretty soon. And I know that you are creating what you say is a fresh set of stories that really puts the media, mainstream in particular, and politicians' claims about crimes and violence into context. What are you finding?
Well, one of the most interesting things that's come up in the last couple of years is that there has been an increase in gun violence, but it's been talked about in the context of this crime wave that has a lot of political facets to it. So we are trying to create and put out stories that go beyond those narratives, that can include data in our fact base, but also talk about the people who are being most impacted, which in the United States tends to be Black, Latino, and lower income folks. So those are the things that we try to uplift and dispel, myths and rumors about the reasons behind gun violence are and the solutions for them, and try to bring a more holistic picture to the conversation.
And so when it comes to that conversation and the Black and brown voices that are left out, or some of the narratives that are left out there, what would you say that you're seeing the most in terms of stories that need to be told?
I think one thing that mainstream media, if you will, I mean, I work for The Guardian, so I don't know that I can call out mainstream media, but one of the things that I notice a lot is there's a myth that Black, Latino, lower income folks are either apathetic or complicit to gun violence that happens in their communities. And that's not the truth. That for some reason, the folks who are most impacted by gun violence are impacted because they chose to live in a bad neighborhood, or because they weren't good parents. And these sort of myths and stereotypes make it difficult for people to get the services and the resources they need. It makes it difficult for folks to get the empathy necessary for there to be a kind of consensus among voters and folks in the US that we need to dedicate resources and legislation to making sure that those who are the most harmed by gun violence are also at the center of the conversations around solutions. Because right now, the people who are most affected by mass incarceration, criminalization, are the same ones who are dying from gun violence at disproportionate rates. And a lot of the times, the solutions brought forth, don't come from these communities. So they usually lead to more surveillance, more incarceration, and a larger police presence, which doesn't necessarily make everyone safe, and isn't necessarily going to lead to justice, which really is, and I think should be, the goal when we're talking about how to address gun violence.
Absolutely, and I would like to say, creating more avenues for viable options when it comes to people's economic opportunities, as well as just ensuring that people have the social services, as you mentioned, people not getting the services that they need and that they should be entitled to as members of our community. But unfortunately, we see these race, class, and I'm sure even to some extent gender biases come out and come into play when individuals who are Black and brown from these communities suffer and, maybe lose their life or lose loved ones as a result of gun violence.
Yeah, I think you're right. And one of the things that I appreciate you saying is talking about kind of the gender and economic factors at play, because it's interesting when I do stories about gun violence, it's so specific. Like community gun violence isn't the same thing as gun violence in like a domestic situation, where you're having intimate partner violence. But for some reason, well, for a lot of reasons that we may discuss, these things are like lumped together in a way that people see it as a one size fits all. It's like, okay, either we get rid of all the guns, we put everybody who had a prior gun charge away, or, we leave people to deal with what they can. And I think one thing we try to do with our coverage is talk about the specific instances of gun violence. Like, violence against Black women is something that we've really been trying to pull out. It's a unique issue. It happens in circumstances that are different than what may happen with young Black men who are the most, disparately impacted by this. But we don't pull those kind of stories out. We make it seem like the communities that are impacted by this are like a monolith, and every instance of gun violence is one thing or another, when in fact each one is unique and requires a very specific set of answers, and needs accountability from everyone from police to DAs to service providers. But if you don't talk to the people most impacted, you won't know what systems they interact with and what needs to be fixed.
And something also that gets me is that we have a lot of these circumstances created by virtue of racism, classism, all of these isms, whether it's redlining or how cities have been structured, where you run an entire freeway right through maybe a blossoming, productive community of color, and then all of a sudden it's completely disenfranchised, and then you'll have people in leadership just shoulder shrugging it, when no, you've created this situation, you've contributed to these circumstances. So to just kind of point a finger saying it's a moral failing is not the answer in any form or fashion when you are part of the problem and you're maintaining this problem. But also to kind of build off of more of what you were speaking about when it comes to Black women in particular, which made me think of victimhood and how Black women are rarely seen as being the victim. And I know you looked into this issue of who gets to be a victim. What have you finding?
Absolutely, I appreciate you asking that. Early in my gun violence coverage, when I was talking to community members, one of the things they would always say to me, when I would ask, what would you like people to know about your loved one, usually a son or a daughter who was killed, they would always say, my kid was not a gang member. They did well in school. They loved puppies. They took care of babies. There were all these wonderful things. And it would make me really sad. I call it posthumous exoneration, like your child has been killed violently, and then you have to then do the work of grieving and clearing their name in the court of public opinion, and I never judge a parent for wanting to do that. If you have the opportunities, speak up on your child, period. So when it comes to that level of victimhood, we have what happens in communities where, like I said, Black folks, especially young Black folks who are killed, are seen as complicit. And then when we talk about Black women, one of the things I think we hear so often is, if it's a domestic violence situation, a lot of the times we hear, why didn't you leave? Didn't you know this? Didn't you know that? A lot of really flippant and disgusting language. Really, when you look at these stories, a lot of these women did everything they could to get out of the situation. They did the restraining orders. They tried to get, guns taken. They went through every recourse, but still these systems did not protect them. And I feel like that is lost in these conversations. And to be a victim, can sometimes, some people kind of bristle at that term, and I understand why, but there's a part of victimhood that leads to like lionization. Like when we talk about families who have been impacted by school shootings, that lionization of their survivorhood, of their victimhood leads to change. It leads to national platforms, and it leads to being seen as someone who's like, yes, I was hurt, and now my mission is to make sure this doesn't happen to other people. But if you're never seen as like fully human or a victim or an innocent victim, let alone, that doesn't happen for you. And then these stories continue to be like pushed to the back burner, and only the people who know what's going on and care what's going on are talking about it. But like I said earlier, to get a critical mass of people who care and to get movement on this, it needs to just be like de facto. If someone is shot and killed, that person is a victim. Looking into their past, trying to pick things apart to try to, take away that innocence is built on racism, and it doesn't take into account, like you said, the redlining. And we just had a story come out about Wilmington here in California, where the places with the most gun violence are also the places with the highest pollution. You can talk about lead and all these things that can go back to accountability that are just completely forgotten the second somebody sees it's the Black person from the hood who has been shot and killed. And it's very frustrating. And like I said, something that we're trying to address with the gun violence project. And I have seen more reporters try to do these stories more holistically and look into some of those underlying factors that lead to gun violence, and not immediately go into like a police source as the number one expert on community violence. So there are some hopeful changes, but there's also been so much backlash over the past couple of years for anything that is looking like reform, because there has been an increase in gun violence. But what people don't talk about when they talk about that increase is that it's been concentrated in the same neighborhoods that have been dealing with redlining, disparate levels of pollution, underinvestment in schools. And nobody talks about that, and it's something that needs to change. And I see progress, but there's room for more, of course.
Absolutely, without question. And to be able to tell these stories and through a lens that shows individuals' humanity and actually invest in them, that's something that mainstream media, and I think no matter where you work for, you can call it out, because the fact is that we know that media is 70% plus white and male. And so we have this system that's built on patriarchal white supremacy. And as a result, certain lives are valued more than others, and certain lives aren't even seen as being lives and having any kind of humanity in them. And so the coverage is something reflective of that. So thank you so much for what you're doing in terms of covering these voices and these stories and how people are impacted by gun violence. I very, very much appreciate it. And for those out there who want to follow you and check out your work, where can they find more?
So you can find my Twitter. It's Abené, spelled ABENE _rights, as in the words right. And if you look up my first and last name, Abené Clayton, on The Guardian, all of my sad and encouraging stories will come up.
Thank you so much. It's Abené Clayton, lead reporter on Guardian's Guns and Lies in America series. Thank you again, Abené.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.